like the kids are going to crash at Ashley's tonight.
Good. Can I have another refill, please?
So I was thinking maybe we could just kind of lay everything out tonight and see how much we have until something else comes up.
I've been trying to find something for 2 months, Molly.
I know, I was thinking maybe you could just, I don't know, swallow your pride a little bit.
Are you guys hiring?
Oh, possibly. You looking?
No. No, thanks.
It's a job.
Look, could you imagine if Mike and the guys came in here and instead of eating with them, I'm serving them? I don't think so.
I know, but look, you just swallow your pride just for a little bit and just find some type of income to hold us over until you find the job you actually want.
Look, I know it's none of my business, but I was in your shoes about 6 months ago. I had no idea how we were going to make ends meet. But you know, I've got a friend of mine that just might be able
What,
to...
get me a job here? Look, I don't think so. I'm in government contracting, network security. I'm looking for something like that.
Thanks, though. It was nice of you to offer.
Look, we're just gonna have to cut back. I'll call the guy this week and get the deposit back on our beach house.
What, are we going to tell the kids we're not going on a summer vacation?
Yeah, that's exactly what we tell them. Look, Molly, we can't afford to spend an extra $2,000 we don't have. Look, in a few months, I don't even think that $2,000 will pay our mortgage.
Hey, there's a lake. There's this lake that my wife and I take the kids camping every summer. It's real cheap, but it's beautiful. It really is. It's relaxing. It's not expensive at all, and the kids love it. I could get the name of it for you.
Thanks.
You need to get a job, Chris.
What do you think I've been doing?
I mean, you just need to take anything, something. I don't think you need to be picky anymore.
Well, look, I can't just take the first job that comes along, all right? I don't think that'll be enough to pay for any bills, let alone this coffee.
Gilly State Park. It's really nice. Here's their website right here.
Okay.
You know, there's a lot of regulars that come in and out of here every day. If you want to send me a resume, maybe I could pass it along.
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Look, I'll just keep making phone calls. Something's got to open up.
We'll figure it out. We've just got to work harder, all right? We can do this. Let me just get the check.
We get the check, please.
You betcha.
Just make a few more phone calls.
Like I said, it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Hey, thanks again, folks, and please pardon me. I'm going to start closing up now, so if there's anything else you need, I'll be in the kitchen.
Thanks.
What's that?
Says coffee's on me. Buddy of mine's a project manager, and he just won a new contract. Says to give him a call. He owes me one.
Have you ever found yourself on the road of crushed hopes, unmet expectations, disappointment, doubt? Most of the time, it's a very lonely road. The problem we face on such a road in our life is that under those conditions, we can become so self-absorbed that we miss help that's right beside us, as they illustrated so well in that drama. He was right there offering help, but they were self-absorbed in their own issues and problems. The same thing can happen on our spiritual journey. Our expectations can so limit God that we miss him even as he's walking at our side. And the further we go down that road of disappointment and doubt, the self-focus, the more difficult it becomes to realize that God is walking with us. On that first Easter morning, 2,000 years ago, there was a couple, a husband and wife, Jesus' disciples, who were in a similar fix on their journey. It had been a terrible weekend that began Friday when the one they had been following on that journey was suddenly taken from them and cruelly nailed to a cross. They were experiencing disappointment, doubt, disillusionment, defeat, discouragement. Their expectations of the Messiah had not been met and had shut off the expectancy of what God could do. They didn't know what to do. So they left Jerusalem on the road to Emmaus, and yet unknown to them, it would begin their journey beyond the cross. So let's pick up this story. It's one of my favorite post-resurrection stories. It's found in Luke 24, beginning at verse 13. That same day, 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles out of Jerusalem. Now, the whole gospel story has been about Jesus moving toward Jerusalem. The road to Jerusalem represented the true path of Christ, the path of sacrifice, and the path of resurrection. But these 2 disciples were on a road away from Jerusalem. It was a road covered with the blackness of despair for them that day. They were confused, they were bewildered. The cruel, blighting, staggering fact of the death of their master stared them in the face at every turn, and they didn't know what to do. True, Jesus said he would rise again on the 3rd day, but dare they think of that now? Yes, they remembered he had raised Lazarus from the dead, but now, did the tomb hold him fast? Would they never see him again? With him, the authorities had buried their hopes. They weren't experiencing just a momentary eclipse of faith, but the settled night of their faith. Though Christianity was born again by the resurrection of its Savior, the disciples of Jesus had no predisposition to resurrection. We looking back on it, but if you were in their place, they did not believe there would be a resurrection. You see that all throughout. Every single one of them that experienced Jesus after his resurrection were surprised by it. Even though they had been told beforehand, they did not have any predisposition to resurrection. So we must understand that it was a difficult journey, that road to Jerusalem, that road beyond the cross. It may have been a difficult journey for us too. So let's walk with them and discover the road back was the road home. Verse 14. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. They were totally absorbed in what had happened that weekend, discussing it among themselves, trying to make some sense of a world that seemed to have caved in on them. And then in verse 15, suddenly Jesus himself came along and joined them and began walking beside them. But they didn't know who he was because God kept them from recognizing him. Now Jesus is all of a sudden walking with them, and they don't recognize him. Now, this seems incredible, but when we think about it a little bit, how many times has Jesus walked beside us and we didn't recognize him? We don't always know he's there because we're self-absorbed in something else. Jesus is with us all the time. He speaks to us often, but we don't have eyes to see or ears to hear. These disciples' vision had been narrowed by their sorrow and their struggle of faith. They needed to see Jesus, but their eyes would have to be opened first. Many times in life, we are on the road of desolation because of sorrow or disappointment or trial. We feel utterly alone. And yet if we could open our eyes, we would realize that Jesus was there all the time. So on Easter Sunday, Jesus comes to the side of 2 unknown followers and struggling with their faith. Our doubts and struggles do not drive Jesus away. He will come near to help those who are struggling. And I think it's quite interesting here that these were 2 unknown disciples. They're not mentioned anywhere else before we get to this story. No one knows anything about them. Sometimes we think Jesus is only going to come to those that are well known or those who are special. But see, Jesus comes to everyone. There's no limitation to who Jesus will come to. That is the kind of Savior that he is. And so here we have this incredible story of him walking not beside one of the 12 or one of the ladies who were followers, but between this young couple, whoever they were, going home away from Jerusalem with their hopes crushed. There he was beside them. Verse 17, you seem to be in deep discussion about something, Jesus said. What are you so concerned about? They stopped, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, you must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that has happened in the last few days. I love that phrase. Jesus, you must be the only one who doesn't know what happened. Of course, he's the only one who does know. But Jesus goes. He just goes along. He says, what things? What things? Whatever they were talking about obviously wasn't causing any happiness. Sadness was written across their faces, maybe even tears in their eyes. And we do get the name of one of them, that's Cleopas. More than likely the other one was his wife. Now, or maybe Luke wanted us to be the other one and take this journey ourselves. There's a good deal of irony here, and of course humor in Cleopas' question. Jesus is the only one who does know what happened in Jerusalem. And I love Jesus' response. This is really special about Jesus' response because he invites them to tell their story. He invites them to tell their story. This is so very important. Telling our story is part of the journey to healing. No matter how painful our story may be, facing it, confronting it, begins the journey home. After the World Trade Center attack, a Red Cross volunteer and psychologist said that many people just needed to tell their story. And the more times they tell it, the more they heal. A few years ago, I was counseling with a colonel in the Air Force who had just come back from Afghanistan, suffering from PTSD, and he desperately needed to tell his story. It was a painful story. His wife called me and said, could you talk to him? Could he tell you his story? I said, you bet he can. You bet he can. And boy, we were together for a number of hours. So we talked about his painful story coming back from Afghanistan and the war. There's a healing process that happens when we listen attentively to someone's story of their life. God brings healing through that process. So Jesus listens to their story. So Jesus asks what things? And in verse 19, the things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth, they said. He was a prophet who did wonderful miracles. He was a mighty teacher, highly regarded by both God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders arrested him, handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We had thought he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago. So here they're telling their story. Here they're telling their story. They thought Jesus was the one. He was going to be the Messiah. He was going to be the one that was going to rescue Israel. Of course, you also see some lack of understanding of the story of Jesus. You see that they don't see the part he played in his death. They saw him as the Messiah of Israel, not of all people. In other words, they had expectations of Jesus that weren't met. They were disappointed. Their expectations and Jesus' mission were not in sync. They weren't together. If we travel the road of our expectations, our hopes will often be crushed. Most of the time, our expectations are about us. They're not about God. Verse 22. Then some women from our group, they're continuing to tell their story. Then some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing. And they had seen angels who told them Jesus was alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, Jesus' body was gone, just as the women had said. It's kind of interesting that they get this far with the story, but they don't go any further. They actually leave. The disciples are waiting. They get this incredible news from the ladies that angels had told them that Jesus wasn't in the grave, but they don't wait. They leave. Always wondered in this story, why did they leave Jerusalem to begin with? Because it was all happening right there. But they did. They did. Something about this whole scene was crushing their hopes. They have all the facts and none of the meaning. Sometimes to see God act, we need to wait. The most difficult thing to do in life is to wait. And it's even more difficult to wait on God because we're expecting him to do things on our time frame. And he just never does that. He does it on his time frame. So let's look at the road back. Jesus wants to get them off the road to Emmaus and on the road back where they can see. Verses 25. He said to them, how foolish you are and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Jesus gives them a Bible study right there on the road to Emmaus. Boy, how would you like to have been present for that? Boy, I wish there'd have been a recording. I wish there'd been an iPhone back then. They could have got that down. Had to be an incredible story. And Jesus talks, he walks them through the Old Testament that talks about him. He could have taken them all the way back to Genesis 3:15, where it says, I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. It will strike your head, and he will strike your heel, where God prophesied the coming of the Messiah. Or Deuteronomy 18:15, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own brothers. You must listen to him. Isaiah 7:14, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive, have a son, and his name will be Emmanuel. Or Isaiah 53, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of suffering who knew what sickness was. He was like one of our people turned away from. He was despised and we did not value him. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, like sheep silent before his shearers, he did not open his mouth. Or Zechariah 12:10. Then I will pour out a spirit of grace and prayer on the house of David and the residents of Jerusalem, and they will look at me whom they pierced. They will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly for him as one weeps for a firstborn. Notice that he says to them, they're slow of heart. When the fire in the heart burns down, our vision begins to dim. When people are not in touch with their deepest center, their heart, they cannot see the events of life from a spiritual perspective. So Jesus is out to stir the embers of their heart. He works with us the same way, from the heart out. He takes them through their scriptures, showing them the theme of redemption of God's Messiah found throughout it. And Jesus himself said in John 5:46, for if you believe Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote of me. Another truth about the Gospels. It's interesting that amidst these disciples' doubts, their questions, and their struggles of faith, Jesus still comes to them with answers. Jesus doesn't say, well, if you don't believe me, if you're doubting, then I'm walking away. No, he doesn't walk away. He doesn't walk away. He comes with answers. If they'll just wait and listen, he comes with answers. What a rich thing. No matter what we're struggling with, no matter how dim the embers of our heart are burning, Jesus will come if we'll just wait and listen. No doubt as Jesus spoke to them, the flame of hope within their heart began to spark. Now it's getting late. They're almost to Emmaus, and we began to come to their home in verse 28. By this time they were nearing Emmaus, the end of their journey. Jesus would have gone on, but they begged him to stay the night with them since it was getting late. So he went home with them. Now here's a crucial moment in the story for these disciples. Jesus would have gone on had they not asked him to stay. He did not force himself upon them. He always waits for an invitation. As Revelation 3:20 says, he knocks at the door and he waits for us to open it. We have to open it. Though Jesus has the power to radically change our life, give us a new heart, give us eternal life with himself, he will not force his way in. There has to be a time in our life when we invite him in. When we invite him in, where we consciously make him Lord. How do you think this story would have ended had they not invited Jesus in that day? I'm sure later in life they had to reflect upon this. Boy, what if we had let him go on? What if we had not invited him into our home? Where would we have been? Because what happens next is the key to the whole story. Verse 30. As they sat down to eat, he took a small loaf of bread, Jesus did. He asked God's blessing on it, broke it, and gave it to them. Suddenly their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and at that moment he disappeared. Of course, Jesus does something very familiar here. It's what he did at the Last Supper. He broke the bread. But kind of picture this scene. They're sitting down with Jesus and he broke the bread. When he broke the bread, he handed it to them. What would they have seen when he handed it to them? They would have seen the nail-scarred hand. They would have seen Jesus and the sacrifice he made for them. Wow. Truth. All of a sudden, the eyes were wide open. What they saw, Thomas later would demand to see in order to have his faith strengthened. The nail-scarred hands. And of course, his resurrection body is no longer subject to the four dimensions we live in, and he disappears. Listen to their response in verse 32. They said to each other, didn't our hearts feel strangely warm as he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? All of a sudden, everything brightens. The light is dawning. Their heart is warming. They could see him because their heart began to be on fire as he spoke to them. And now they're really excited. They're not going to stay in Emmaus. No, they're going back to Jerusalem. It says in verse 33, and within the hour, they were on their way back to Jerusalem. They found the 11 apostles who were there and told them their story. And while they were telling them their story, guess who came? Jesus. Jesus came to visit all of them at that scene back there. Within the hour, they were back on the road. What a difference. They started on the road to Emmaus with a despondent heart, hope lost. They head home in jubilation, hope restored, heart on fire. What made the difference? A meeting with a resurrected Lord who stirred the embers of their hearts with the fire that opened their eyes. You see, all of us have been on the Emmaus road at one time or another. You may have come into this service this morning on the Emmaus road. This road is a road that's away from God's calling on your life. Many times a road of loneliness or despair or confusion or hopelessness, a journey that never reaches beyond the cross to the other side of Easter. Whatever that road is in your life, Jesus is on it with you, seeking to help you see him, to stir the embers of your heart in his presence, seeking to tell you that deep within your soul, the road back to God is available. It is a good feeling when your heart is warmed by the presence of the power of God. A number of years ago, I had a young cousin whose father my uncle was a career Navy man. She married very young. She married a Navy SEAL. And you know, you heard a lot of stories about Navy SEALs recently. He was one. But he wasn't ready for marriage, and probably she wasn't either. And they got into horrible fights. It was a terrible marriage. His brother, her brother, my cousin, would come to me and talk to me about it, said, I've got to intervene. I've got to stop this. It's horrible what's going on. And this goes on for a good while. And then one day, on that Navy SEAL's journey to Emmaus, he opened his heart and invited God in. Wow. I had never seen a change like that change. And today, 25 years later, he's been pastoring for over 20 years. God works miracles. That's what he does. He'll do it in your life. He'll do it in your life. It's the road home. When you open that door, it's the road home to life in Christ. Don't leave it closed. Be sure it's open today in your life. Let's pray.
How can I